can be pretty inaccurate, which can cause problems. There are a few other known issues as well. So anyway, some of those will probably get looked at in the context of Animesh before we go live with that, and some of those will probably wait to be looked at in more detail by Graham for the it's in progress, but it's probably a bit farther away than the Animesh stuff. Oh, I see we have Medu now. So are we streaming? Yeah, I was just giving the brief rundown. We got Bakes on Mesh out as a project viewer. We're still working on land impact QA for Animesh and some inbounding issues on the viewer side. Let's see. Oh, hey, there's Mazadux. Hey, Mazadux. So I think that's probably the brief summary. Alexa, do you want to say anything in summary land before we get into the Q&A part?
No, just reminded people earlier before you came in, and I will link this up again, is that we have a Mesh, Bakes on Mesh feedback form. Veer's doing a great job of answering questions and fielding ideas, so please join us in the forum. I think back to you.
All right. Yeah, we still have the Animesh forum as well. I suppose everybody knows about that one by now, but I'll try to paste that in.
Grab that.
There. Alright, so questions. Talk to the major mesh body designers. I haven't. I know there's been some discussion about that. Alexa, do you know if we specifically reached out to folks about this yet?
I don't believe we have yet, but we definitely can. I've seen some of Slink's Jira's coming in.
I talked to Shadeen of Slink for hours last night, and we were both testing it, and she is absolutely thrilled. We're both absolutely thrilled. This is going to cut her workload for her mesh body down considerably.
That's great, Kathy.
She's just super excited. And everything right out of the box is working so well. So
that's great news.
Yeah, so yeah, very excited.
For Bakes on Mesh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
sorry,
yeah, I'm on the test viewer right now, and I'm wearing a Baked on Mesh avatar. So if you don't have the viewer, you're probably seeing my body is all gray, as I'm assuming is what people see if they don't have the Baked on Mesh viewer.
Let's see. We got a question about 1K bakes. We should clarify that we are planning to bump up the supported resolution for the baking service so that you can have baked textures that are 1024 squared. That work has been done, but it hasn't been deployed yet because there's some other work for baking service also underway right now. Anchor is working on some additional logging stuff, so I think that's all going to go out as a package. I think at the time that goes out, we're also going to be bumping up the number of machines to support the baking service because it's as increasing the texture resolution is also going to load on the machines a bit. Anchor, anything else you want to say about that right now? I know we don't have a definite date, but I don't know if you have any other comments.
I mean, I'm just wrapping up some final stuff. So hopefully, like next week, I'll put that 1K and the baking logging to testing. So yeah, I mean, it should be out in a couple of weeks.
Has anyone noticed yet that the eyelashes are tied to the eyeballs rather than being tied to the head texture?
Oh, that's interesting.
One got their wires crossed somewhere.
Yeah, our default texture coordinates do have some quirks. I think there was some comment about like the right and left arm. It turns out that we only have one arm in the texture map, and so the right and left arm are basically mirror images of each other and pulling from the same pixels in texture space, which kind of stinks if you want to put something on one arm and not the other. But yeah, that sounds like the eyelash is another interesting feature there. Yes, you should always try to pick tattoos that are mirror symmetrical.
Yeah, so Shadeen and I were talking about that she might try using the skirt texture or the hair to do the left arm, or to do the opposite arm.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff. Just make it a different material, on the mesh, a different face, and then assign it a different baked on texture. So she thinks that should work pretty well.
That's kind of a cool idea. Yeah, the skirt is something that normally the skirt texture doesn't get used much because people you tend to use the system avatar skirt, but that means you could potentially repurpose it for something else.
Right. Yeah, the skirt and the hair, the system hair. Nobody hardly ever uses the system hair.
Yeah.
I don't. So those two. We talked about the eyeballs, but yeah, too many people are going to be using mesh eyes, and she says the mesh eyeballs. She can use the textures, in her library or her inventory with the baked on textures for the eyeballs on mesh eyes, and they look fantastic. She's really thrilled.
Yeah, question whether it would be possible to expand the baked texture slots in the future. I mean, it would certainly be conceivable, but right now we have the baked texture slots that are tied in with the wearables that actually carry the textures. So, to add more slots, you would have to kind of extend the definition of what data got stored in those wearables as it's not like one of those unthinkably super hard things to do, because we do we have in the past added new types of wearables and so forth. This would be kind of like additional field within them. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not part of the initial Bakes on Mesh project. Lucia asks, you'd have to upload the textures as a skirt. Yeah, you would. I mean, basically the wearables act as sort of the containers for the textures. So, if you want to add a texture that's going to get layered in with other stuff, you can fit it into any wearable that covers that body region. Some wearables are limited to certain body regions, like the shirt wearables only carry a texture that gets applied to the upper body, and others can potentially be applied to the whole avatar. Tattoo wearables carry several textures that correspond to all the body.
Wouldn't using one of the other textures to do, say, an arm it would have the problem that it would alpha out the place where that texture was supposed to have been.
It would, but in this case, if you use the skirt, you would be hiding the system avatar skirt, which doesn't tend to get used anyway.
Huh. Interesting.
Now post something about mixing classic and mesh attachments with bakes on. Could you explain what we're looking at there? What that means?
I can explain.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if you actually have an alpha that you were using to hide the system avatar, then that's going to be part of your bake texture as well, which then is potentially going to fight with trying to actually display that to show something else. Yeah. Kathy, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I can explain the photo of that was posted. She's wearing a pair of shorts that are using probably a baked on texture for the shorts, and since the shorts that she's wearing is mesh, it's hiding the lower body of the real avatar when she wears the mesh shorts that are using the baked on texture of the shorts. That's why the default avatar that she's wearing's lower body is missing.
Okay. Oh, we had a discussion about the eyeball resolution. Anchor, what is the current rule? We're bumping everything to 1024. We keep it, or do we currently keep the eyes at 256, or?
I think yeah, like everything else, but the eyes like bump up to 1K. Eyes are 256. I mean, I can change that to 512. I don't know. That's like.
I would be curious what the impact of that would be. I mean, of course people do look at the eyes a lot when they're focused in. On the other hand, it is a pretty small target compared to the rest of the face. I mean, it looks like you could support 128 would support the same, texture density on the eyes that you'd have for like the rest of the face at 1024 anyway, wouldn't it? Yeah, I guess there's sort of anime things. You might have a lot larger eyes. It'd be more of an issue. Corley asks about hiding the base mesh section. Yeah, Anchor can add to this too. I don't think that we're necessarily at the final answer for how we want system avatar hiding to work. This is the kind of initial implementation that lets people test out the bakes on part of the bakes on mesh, and then we'll as we understand more about the use cases, we can talk about if there's other pieces that are must do's to get this out the door.
That optional hiding that may require a change in the baking service itself. Like, I mean, how do you know like which base mesh are supposed to be hidden or not? That
Yeah, it seems
that's
like
my
the only
opinion.
way you could avoid changing the baking service would be if there's an unused texture slot for objects that we could repurpose. In which case, you could store an additional alpha in that the viewer would look at, but the baking service wouldn't know about. So we'd have to do kind of if we were trying to go that route, we'd have to do kind of a dive into into exactly how we're representing the kind of face and texture data for prims.
Are you sort of saying, Veer, like having a master alpha that overrides the baked texture on the default avatar, so that you could mask out different parts of the default avatar and not affect the baked on mesh um, uh, alpha for
Right.
the baked texture? That'd be cool. Yeah, you just need 3 slots. You need one for the head, upper body, and lower body. And that would work awesome.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that we're doing that. It's just one of the possibilities that we've kicked around in some of these discussions. Yeah. Polysale, I don't see how you distinguish between baked skin texture and baked shorts texture. I mean, you've basically only got so many baked slots, 5 or whatever it is, and so you could use them for different things on your meshes, but they would still have. Those are still kind of the only ones you've got available with the current system. So if you wear a baked mesh body and some baked mesh shorts, they'll share the texture, as Beck says. So yeah, so the only way you could have different behavior there would be if you wanted to, if you made your mesh shorts use something other than the lower body texture, for example. Which, I mean, you could. You're not tied to using the corresponding body regions, but although if you don't, then the kind of logic for which bits get hidden may be not what you're shooting for.
Right, like theoretically, just like Sadine is thinking about using the skirt area to for the arm. If you did have a pair of mesh shorts or clothing, you could use that same skirt area to texture just your clothing, and then it wouldn't hide the avatar. It would be only hiding the skirt or the system hair. You could do the same thing with the system hair. Although if we absolutely could, what would be awesome is to just add a couple of triangles faces to hidden in the default avatar's mesh, and just make those uh, new faces, new materials, and then we could have a lot more that wouldn't affect the avatar mesh itself, and it would only cost you only need three vertices to make up a triangle for a face. So you could have 5 or 6 new ones in there, just have it hidden in the body. You can even degenerate, is it called degenerate, where you put the vertices on top of each other so the face actually disappears in the mesh, but we would still have the texture, be able to bake the texture. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, you could just have the baking service know about additional, baked textures that don't actually correspond to regions on the system avatar body, too. So, you wouldn't necessarily have to have corresponding triangles on the system avatar at all, but
yeah, I don't know how the baking system. I have no idea how the baking system actually works, so I didn't know if you would need an actual face on the avatar to have the texture on the avatar in order for it to read. So yeah, if you didn't need the faces, then yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. There's various possible extensions that involve extending the baking service. Those are probably not things that we're going to tackle for the initial Bakes on Mesh release. The way we generally try to structure these things is to, get a subset that's useful, even if it doesn't do everything you could possibly want out, as quickly as we can, and then kind of iterate on it and do a potential follow-up if there's additional extensions we decide we want to tackle. So things like trying to add new slots to the baking service, or had a lot of questions about material support, that kind of thing. That's more likely to be considered as a possible follow-on.
So what slots do we have right now? I was told last week we only had the head, upper body, and lower body. Now we have skirts and what else?
We have, it's 5, isn't it?
Yeah, there's 5. Skirts and there's one more.
Eyes.
Eyes, yeah, eyes.
What about, isn't there hair too?
There's hair, yeah, so hair, upper body, lower body, skirt, and eyes.
And head, all right, so that's at least 6. Is it actually...
No, it's 6. It's 6, yeah, it's 6.
Okay.
It probably would be good to add a couple more that aren't attached to any part of the default. Yeah, it would probably be, I would think it'd be a really good thing to do. Yeah, opening up the baking service more generally is a much larger question. I think it's got potential for abuse or at least serious lag, but there are also probably cool things you could do with it. Something we may want to continue discussing, but no immediate plans there. Yeah, so we've had questions about extending this to, extending the baking service to include materials. Is it well defined what it would mean to bake together? All the textures, including the material textures.
I think it's a solvable problem, but yeah, it's complex. have to look at the alpha of the diffuse texture along with any materials that are associated with that texture, and then you're going to have to do a big mashup of everything that's supposed to be tied to each layer, and then combine them using those alpha maps.
Well, I think there's the issue there that your normal and your specular map are not technically going to be alpha like the diffuse texture is.
No, but they're going to be tied to a specific diffuse texture. So the alpha for each layer is going to be on the diffuse texture, and then you'll have a specular and normal map that's associated with that layer. And so layers that go on top of that would have their own alpha characteristics, and then you apply that to whatever materials are applied to that. Because otherwise you're going to wind up with a situation where you've got clothing with your specular and normal maps from your skin layer on top of the clothing, which is just going to look ridiculous.
But my point is that nobody makes a bump map with an alpha section in it. You know, it's just a solid bump map. So if you have, like, say, a T-shirt that you made and you made an alpha for it, a bump for it, there's no alpha'd out area in the bump. Whereas the diffuse obviously has alpha'd out areas, if that's what you want.
The normal map is going to have an associated diffuse texture for it, and so to figure out how you're supposed to alpha out the normal map, you have to look at the diffuse texture that goes with it.
Ah, I gotcha.
And the alpha channel on the diffuse or on the normal map is used for its specular exponent, so it can't be used like that.
Well, I had a question I want to toss out that's not Bakes on Mesh related. For Animesh, we're working on fixing remaining viewer bugs, and I just wanted to ask the people who have been testing the Animesh viewer, have you seen crashes with the Animesh viewer? And if so, are there particular areas that you've tended to see crashes? Unfortunately, we don't really have great data about crashes with Animesh. I haven't seen crashes, and I don't see a lot in our crash logs, but I do see indications that the crash rate is kind of high if you look at the separate stats that collect that. So I'm just curious what everybody's experience has been with that. Okay. Well, if anybody does see areas where, every time I try to work with this object, or every time, I try to use this feature or whatever, the Animesh viewer tends to crash, it would be very helpful if you could, file a JIRA about that and link in some of the associated information, because that would give us a good, starting point for tracking down, what the problem is.
And if you're crashing with a specific item you've created, if you can put it out and tell us where it's located on the region so we can grab a copy and test with it.
Great, thanks.
Now, the newest Animesh viewers, that going to be, when are we going to be able to use that on the main grid soon?
Well, I mean, the limiting factor for using Animesh on the main grid is getting it deployed to the simulators. So the steps there are first we're trying to finalize the QA for the Animesh land impact calculations. Once we think that's all working, we'll deploy that simulator to all of the test regions on DD. We may want to extend that to a larger number of test regions than we have now, but at least all the ones we currently have. And at that point, then people can do some testing on a DD to make sure that everything works in a reasonable way. And while you're doing that, we're going to be doing the simulator QA pass for the Animesh code. And once the Animesh simulator code passes QA, then we'll be talking about the process for getting it out onto Agni. Eventually, they'll probably go out to C channels, which means it'll work on some subset of regions, and then it'll go through the process from there of kind of working its way up to being deployed everywhere. Yeah, I mean, Lucia, we could potentially put it out everywhere with the switch turned off, but I think what we've been talking about is more just just deploying it with the switch on at the same time.
Now, wasn't there supposed to be a viewer out this week?
We do not have a new Animesh viewer out. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be coming out, but we'll try to get one out fairly soon, because that has a couple of changes related to the land impact calculations as well, and we want that to be consistent. There's a question about bakes on mesh working when attached as a HUD. That's a good question. You should probably file a JIRA about that. I can't think of any particular reason it would make sense to have bakes on mesh for a HUD, but it would probably be a discussion worth having. I think right now it's just working that way because it works for all attachments. It's not a particular design decision.
Yeah, it works. I mean, I tested that.
For tools.
It does work.
Okay.
Oh, good. Because HUDs is a huge thing, so I mean, I still don't know the whole concept of this bakes on mesh stuff, but it is probably going to be needed to be working with HUDs, so that's a good thing.
Levy, I haven't seen any offset issues with Animesh.
You say it's a little off when turning. Is that just temporary and then eventually catches up? Like maybe it's just lagging by a frame or something like that, or is it like a persistent thing?
Leviathan, why, if an animation fixes it, why don't you just play an animation? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there should always be an animation playing on your avatar or Animesh.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the HUD case really makes textures easier to steal than they are anyway. I mean, obviously you could just put a big cube on your body and put the texture on the cube too, and you know, if from the right camera angle, you would see the texture. So um, I'm not sure that trying to keep bakes on mesh textures off of HUDs is really much of a difference. You know, whether it's useful to have bakes on mesh on HUDs, I'm kind of agnostic on, but it's an interesting question.
Well, in order to have bakes on a HUD, you'd have to have bakes on a normal mesh that's on an avatar. So we got to get one before the other, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about all of the clothing appliers that are out there, and already the mesh bodies, and how all this is going to work with the mesh bodies and the clothing appliers for these mesh bodies and stuff. And that's the only reason why I brought up the HUD issue.
Well, kind of the point is that you don't need a HUD anymore to do that, isn't it?
Well, not if you're not the owner of the mesh. You still, I mean, there's a permission issue there. That's why.
That's what the body parts are for. Why we're doing the bakes on mesh.
Yeah, according to Sadine of Slink, she's like, we checked it out. She can create a mesh body and set the faces to the baked on areas that they're corresponding to, and then make it no mod and give it to somebody. And then in order to change those textures when they're wearing that custom mesh body, all they do is wear system clothing, you know, or that's where they would get the textures from, like so that you don't need appliers. She did say the things that we will still need appliers for are the normal maps and the other one for the shine. I can't. I'm having a brain fart.
The spec maps.
Yeah, the spec maps. That those will still use appliers, and that you'll be able to apply it to a mesh body that is no mod. But to get the textures, you know, like for clothing and stuff, you would just wear like system clothing to get those textures to apply to either the mesh body itself or mesh clothing. Mesh clothing could use that same system, so you don't really need the HUDs as nearly as much, or the appliers, as you used to. So it actually makes the system much easier to use than what we currently have.
But wouldn't that mean that you have to have the full permission texture in order to apply it to a system layer?
Nope, the texture is contained within a clothing layer. So it's just like how we used to sell system clothing. Like I'm wearing all system clothing right now, and I'm wearing a custom mesh body. And I'll post a link to an image that I already just posted that shows what it looks like. It's a custom mesh avatar body, and I'm wearing system skin, you know, the skin that is applied to the system avatar. My head is the default avatar head, but the rest of the body is a custom mesh body, and it works perfectly. And so yeah, you don't need full permission textures.
Normal texture UUIDs are fixed, right? The mapping from that UUID is to exactly one texture from the asset system. But these special texture UUIDs for baked on that refer to baked on messages they're essentially soft links, right? They're pointed to a mutable texture that's provided specifically for you by the bake service. But everybody's using the same UUID for the head texture.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've basically all of the bakes on mesh objects are going to be using the same UUIDs, and then it just gets interpreted by the viewer. So when the viewer sees one of these magic UUIDs, it says, "Oh, I know what that means. That means show the bake texture instead," and so that's what it does. If you're viewing it with a viewer that doesn't support bakes on mesh, then it doesn't realize that's a special UUID, and then you just see the image that has that, the existing texture that has that UUID. That's why if somebody looks at Kathy with the Animesh viewer, for example, they're going to see a bunch of text written on her body instead of seeing her correct baked appearance. So, I mean, the hope is that this has at least a couple of benefits. One, you don't need as many textures as Beck notes. If you've got a whole bunch of textures to make up your, say to define what your mesh head looks like, right? So you've got the kind of a makeup layer, and you've got your base skin layer, and you've got a tattoo of a butterfly or something. All that stuff would be stored in separate system clothing objects, combined into a single resulting bake texture by the baking service. So then when your appearance is getting shown for that head, then it's all resolved to a single texture rather than layers to every user. Right, somebody who's looking at you is just going to be told, okay, this is this person's baked textures, and the head is supposed to be showing the head bake, and so then the viewer says, okay, fine, I know what to do with that. It only needs one UUID, which is just this sort of reserved UUID, and it doesn't need to get the several different textures that were combined to produce that resulting bake. It just needs to know the final.
The limits of the bake service have been changed, because I think it used to be that there was a maximum of 5 tattoos or so, and now I put on 8. I kind of stopped after 8.
I believe the current limit is just on the total number of wearables. I think you can have like 62 maybe clothing items. So instead of saying you can have so many shirts and so many tattoos and so on, we just say, you can have a total of so many clothing items, and then you can mix and match however you want.
Good times.
All, I don't know, skirts or whatever.
Oh, so if somebody's wearing, like, say, 2 shirts, what is it, the order that you applied it to your avatar, that you wore it? So that the first one you wore is the lowest, is the one that's underneath, and the next one you wear is on top?
Your system clothing actually stores ordering information, so that it can be modified. If you're editing your appearance, you can specify what ordering different things go in. So, like the shirts, you can specify what order the shirts are supposed to be in. But then, like, the shirts are always going to be above the tattoos, and so there's sort of a predefined ordering of different types of wearables. Jackets go over shirts, and shirts go over tattoos, and so forth.
skin is the base, the very bottom.
Right. We had a question. Is that regarding the improvement on the textures cache? I'm not sure what that's in reference to, Einstein. Is that do some of the viewers have some of the viewers been doing something different with the texture cache?
We have a project to redo the texture cache in progress. It's not part of either this effort or the other. It's kind of a standalone effort to re-implement the textures cache to be faster, more effective. You can't use local textures as part of clothing layers, so no. Because the bake service doesn't have access to them, they're local.
Worley says mesh bakes don't update in edit appearance mode. That's actually kind of an interesting point. When you're in edit appearance mode, you're not seeing your, like, and you're just looking at the effect on your system avatar. You're not actually seeing your bake texture because that may be out of date. You're seeing a local calculation of what your viewer thinks your bake texture is going to look like. And we probably don't have any logic right now to display that local approximation on a BakeSon mesh object. So that actually would be a good thing to file a JIRA about if yeah, okay, good. Yeah, I have not read through all of the existing JIRAs before this meeting, so it's fine to bring up things that have already been filed, but I haven't seen them yet. Lucy, I'm still going to hold off on talking about the land impact, but I really do think we're close to the point where that'll be public. So I'll be happy to discuss it once we finish the QA on this on some of our kind of internal test regions. Lucia asks about animations not showing on region entry. I don't think that is going to be one of the things we're tackling for the initial Animesh release. You know, it turns out to be somewhat hairy to get working, and I think the recommended practice is probably just going to be make sure that you do, you know, do something to trigger animation states often enough that that stuff, you know, gets sent out in a reasonably timely fashion. It's currently in the bucket of you know, potential Animesh follow-up tasks rather than.
I know we only have a few minutes left. I seem to be seeing a lot of new lindens. Do we get some new lindens here?
No, I don't know who's new. We've got Dan has been with us a long time. He's doing QA on Animesh, and I think also Bakes on Mesh. Anchor's been doing development work for Bakes on Mesh. Let's see. Mazadox has been doing QA for Animesh. I don't know if he's been at very many of our meetings before.
Yeah, I've never seen his name. No. How you doing?
Well, welcome, Mazadox.
Oh,
Right,
we've never mentioned Winlight today. Do we have any updates on that?
Oh yeah, I don't have any updates. Is Ryder here? I'm not seeing Ryder. Well, I guess we don't have an update today. Lucia hopes there are bounding box issues or surprises. Oh, well, I think we can probably oblige you on that. Oh, well, now you're being picky. Alright, well, I think we're about at time. Let's see, we are not currently scheduled to have a meeting next week because it conflicts with a company all-hands meeting. So we will see people here in 2 weeks. In the meantime, feel free to post to the forums or file JIRAs. Let us know how things are going. And we will talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Fear.
Thanks, Fear.
Thanks, everybody.